Welcome to the FounderVideo podcast, an interview series bringing you the latest and greatest info on B2B marketing, revenue operations, and go-to-market strategy from respected experts. Here is your host, Will Martin.
So today we're here for the 16th, episode of the FounderVideo podcast. Today we have with us James McKay, founder of VEN, RevOps consultancy / firm. And we're here to talk about all things RevOps, SaaS, CRM, Hygiene, all that sort of stuff. So in the first place, pleasure to have you and welcome, James.
Well, excited. Love this. I'm a fan, so excited to be here.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So let's talk about your previous positions before you started VEN, because you have a pretty solid track record, / Clear Code, Trade Gecko, mainly as director of RevOps, if I'm not mistaken, but other positions as well. What were the biggest lessons you learned throughout your career that led you to, in sales, finance, ops, that led you to start VEN?
It's funny. I started VEN because I had to. So I think coming out of my last full-time role, I think it was time. And a lot of entrepreneurs will tell you that it was time. And some people know this early, some people know it a little bit later. And I didn't try and start this business, to be honest with you. I tried to start a different business. I tried to start a dumb consumer app in the travel space. And it was just something that had been on my mind. I toyed around with it. I got some designs. I started talking to sort of like the friends and family circle, not the people I don't know circle. And the people in my network I trust looked at me and said, this might be an okay idea. It's probably not, but it might be. But not you. Like, why would you do this? Go do RevOps. Go do something in RevOps. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of like, I kind of want something a little bit different. But while this was all happening, I was kind of having some conversations with, basically anyone I could, because I was trying to put myself out there, and a contract basically materialized. And it was with a very good company called LTSE, or Long-Term Stock Exchange. A good friend of mine went to work there, and he saw an opportunity for me to come in with the skills that I have and help. And I took it and I loved it. And so from there, I'm like, okay, so maybe I'll listen to the signals. I'll apply my actual experience. I like working in this kind of shorter format. Okay, this is the business. So that's from there, I just kind of built up what made sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you were sort of trying to pivot out of RevOps. Were you fed up of it? Were you like, of course, like many years in RevOps, maybe you just wanted to try something else. But what was your sentiment around it? Like, were you, I don't know.
I think what it was there was a bit of confusion. I think I was burnt out, and I think I was burnt out working for others. But when that was happening, I think I was rolling in other things that weren't actually bothering me. And so I think I was trying to do a complete departure from anything I'd been doing, when the reality was I just needed to depart from a couple of specific things. I needed more control over my environment. I needed to be able to pursue my own vision. I needed to have more leeway to follow my own instincts instead of the instincts of others. And the actual subject matter wasn't nearly as big of a problem as I might have thought it was at one time. So I think ultimately the market and the signals and the people all were a little bit wiser than me for that very small moment in time. And I'm really glad that I ended up where I did.
Nice. So you started your career in sales, and then you moved into business growth, business ops, and then last full-time role was head of finance, right, and operations. A lot of people don't know how to define RevOps, because it's kind of from company to company, responsibilities change, and who owns what, it's not always as clear. But usually people understand RevOps as sales and marketing in a way, right? Do you think there's a disconnect, having worked in finance, between RevOps or sales and marketing and finance? And if so, what is that disconnect and how does it manifest according to your experience?
Yeah, I do. I think, and often there is, and I think that the really strong companies actually find the synergy, but they usually don't. And I think the reason why is around territory. So basically, the way I see RevOps really connecting well with finance is sort of FP&A. There's a very kind of natural, almost overlap with FP&A and RevOps. And FP&A will take metrics and they'll work with models and they'll project things and then they will make financial decisions based on those projections. Meanwhile, RevOps will pull numbers, look at conversion rates, make projections, and those projections will be around revenue. And in a bad company, those two people will be doing that completely separately with their own sets of numbers and arriving at their own conclusions, and those conclusions are disconnected. But in a really good company, FP&A will know where they begin and end, and RevOps will know where they begin and end, and those two groups will work hand in hand together and become a lot more powerful. And so I think if a finance leader is having trouble with this, I think that they should think of sort of the plug in as at FP&A. And I think if a RevOps team is really having trouble with finance, I think that they can appeal to the FP&A side by showing how they have the access and the tools and the knowledge to actually talk about some really key components of what makes a good FP&A person.
Do you have any stories on this? Have you experienced that kind of misalignment? No need to, of course, give names or
Yes.
anything, but yeah.
Yes, I have.
Go ahead.
I have. I won't give too much detail. And I think that I'm happy to talk about it because I think we got to a really good place. Because we had a really, really strong finance leader who I ended up actually rolling into and I really enjoyed. But there was a big disconnect and it was exactly in the nature that I described. And it took some growing on all of our parts, including mine. Like I wouldn't have been able to say this before this experience, to really understand this piece. And then eventually we got really working well together. So within one single company, I saw the complete disconnect, the figuring of it out, and then the after photo, so to speak, on how effective it can be.
Tell me about that figuring of it out. Like, how do you go from being disconnected to actually operate within the same framework or in alignment, basically? Like, were there meetings? Were there tensions? Were there, I don't know, you do planning, like an agreement, or like how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of two different entities looking stupid or looking disorganized. Because I think that what happened was we both had our numbers and we both had our audiences, but eventually at an executive level, those two things come together, and then the misalignments are really, really obvious. And when you're in front of the audience of the top people at the company, then all of a sudden the priorities start to emerge around figuring out alignment. And so I think it was trial by fire and feeling the pain that was really the impetus to understand this problem. But eventually we did. So that figured it out. But then it was a matter of, okay, let's look at each other's models. Let's look at each other's priorities. Let's really understand what each other are trying to achieve and see where we can connect our energy and help each other out.
Mm-hmm. So back to the definition of RevOps and what it does entail. Again, there's a lot of confusion around the topic, and it can mean different things for different people. So how would you define revenue operations, and why do you think there is sort of a buzz around the term? Or, I feel like there's a growing demand. Maybe I'm wrong here, but in tech startups and SaaS and whatnot, it's been becoming more and more clear that most of the marketing and sales teams are not operating as they should be in terms of alignment and, the key strategic objectives of the company. They're not usually in alignment with that. It's a lot of conflicted interests. So I think RevOps plays a role there, but I want to get your take first, like the kind of not definition, but like how would you define it? What do you think it entails from your experience? or what it should entail, and why is it in such a good position right now, like people are talking about it, and it's a growing demand?
Well, yeah. I mean, before I even define it, I'll just I will quantify what you're saying, which is there's buzz, and there is buzz because it in 2023 was the number one growing job title on LinkedIn, number one of all job titles anywhere. And also the role of head of operations or head of revenue operations grew over 300%. I think that this is in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. I was just reading the stat yesterday. So there's evidence. It's very, very highly in demand. And I think it's something that was in demand a lot when money was free and growth was happening. Oh, we need operations people to come in and catch up our systems and catch up our ops and our workflows to all of these people and all of the growth that's happening. And then the demand doubled down when things slowed down and they're like, oh, we need efficiency. We need somebody to come into a go-to-market and think of efficiency. So in terms of how I define it, the whole scope of anything customer facing to me is the scope of revenue operations, from the opening of customer acquisition, like marketing, all the way through cash, and then through retention. So it should cover your marketing teams, your partnership team, your sales functions, all of them, and your customer success or support or whatever through the end of the customer lifecycle. That's the width of it. In terms of the verticals in it, I see it as your actual operations and workflows, like how these people do their jobs, the systems, the enablement component. So making sure that all of the systems and the designs and the workflows are actually coherent and manageable and digestible and adopted by the people using them. And the final piece is data, understanding data, planning, forecasting, that whole element of things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Is there any workflow? Because, in order to materialize or make it more real, the idea, because, workflow, I understand you, of course, but like for the audience as well, right? Like, what are some of the, I guess, projects or tasks or stuff that you've done throughout your career that you're the most proud of, that you think have, or at VEN, of course, right? Like things that you're doing for clients that are, providing a great impact across the org and are helping, those departments you mentioned, right? Sales, customer success, and marketing do their jobs better in a more efficient way.
I can tell you, so there's really advanced like AI cool projects that we've worked on with customers, but I think that the thing that gives me the most satisfaction that I've done dozens of times now is defining stages and building like actual governance around stages of the cycle. And it's not novel. Like all CRMs are already built around this idea that the stages of a contact or the stages of an opportunity or a deal, if you're a HubSpot user, are critically important. However, when I enter a company, it so often is clear right away that the stages are kind of a loose guideline and they're not overly meaningful. But when I start to articulate for clients or for companies that I work for full time, exactly how powerful these stages can be if you define them properly and really give people a sense of what their purpose is, a lot of things start to fall in place after that. So your stage is it's a very specific purpose. In order to get to this stage, you have a very specific criteria. During this stage, you have a very specific set of things you're supposed to try and accomplish. And in order to leave this stage, you have another set of criteria that you need to meet. After that, structuring your team, building your team, collecting data, adding validation, just building all of the operations becomes so much easier. When that piece is a moving piece, everyone's always trying to catch up to it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that RevOps is a thing for only big or well-funded companies, or like is it something that is a function that every company should have in the early stage? Because I think there's a misconception around this sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a very valuable thing to have early. I think you don't want to have it before you have a go-to-market function, but I think you want to have it shortly after you have a go-to-market function. I think depending on how your go-to-market is designed, it might even be one of the first 4 or 5 people that you want, especially if you're running go-to-market and marketing. The profiles are completely different, I think, for somebody who joins an early stage company and somebody who joins a later stage company. Because if we go back to that umbrella I described of the width of the role and then the 4 pillars of it, it's a lot of responsibility. So being effective at an early stage company when you can be spending your time in all of this territory is hard and takes a really organized and experienced person. Whereas later stage companies, I think you can bring in really highly specialized people to focus on smaller areas, but do it really well. But I think it's getting to be an earlier and earlier stage hire for sure.
Mm-hmm. What got you into RevOps, by the way? Because it's a role that didn't exist like that long ago. It wasn't there. So you started in sales, and of course, I think it's a natural path. Sales can lead to RevOps. Most likely, I see most of the RevOps people that come from sales. And I got into RevOps because I was highly interested in sales. But so I guess it's the natural path. But what got you into it, and how did you start to harness it? Because there's, now more and more, there's more certifications, courses, training basically for RevOps people, but it's not something that you can, there's not a degree for it, right? Like there's not even masters, not that often, right? So most people that want to break into it, they need to go through sales first, or, what's your take there?
So first of all, I think doing sales is the best way into RevOps for sure. I think any way you can gather sort of empathy and experience for your ultimate user is a really good path. And yeah, it's funny. RevOps has sort of always existed in a way, but really hasn't existed as a role that people talk about or think about for much more than 5 or 6 years. So the way it worked for me was, I don't know if I was a natural salesperson. I think that my success as a salesperson was spotty, and there were times when I did really well and I generated really interesting deals, or I got really focused on a segment and I did a lot of damage on it. But then there were other times where I just felt like I was frustrated by the lack of control, or I felt like there was misalignment between the company and what was reality. And these are things that all salespeople experience. But while I was going through that kind of career path, I ended up inheriting a Salesforce instance by necessity. And I found myself just enjoying it, using it the way that I wanted to use it. And it was pretty ungoverned, and I didn't do much with it if I look back on it now. But I loved digging through the data that we had and trying to figure out interesting ways of approaching the market and segmenting it and giving ideas to people and organizing it the way I thought it should be organized. And when it came time to sort of make a decision of, do I want to pursue the path of being a VP of sales, or do I want to do something else? The answer was, I want to do something else. I think the VP of sales or the CRO role, God love them. I think that is the hardest job in the world. And I just could not see myself doing that. And so I thought, I'm going to pivot my career. And so I would have called myself at the time an operationally focused revenue leader, and flipped that to a revenue focused operations leader. So I then kind of made a couple of lateral moves to pick up more RevOps experience and get experience with more CRM instances. And then I finally gathered enough experience by the time I got to Clearco to kind of use that knowledge that I gathered and grow some more.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. One of the biggest challenges in RevOps is maintaining CRM hygiene, right? It's one of the, if your CRM, it's not a source of truth, everything else will break. Right? It doesn't make any sense to build workflows or anything around it.
This podcast is brought to you by FounderVideo. We'll cut your LinkedIn ads costs by at least 50% with natural-looking creatives that prospects actually want to consume. Just have an expert in your C-suite show up to a 90-minute interview once a month and let us take care of the rest. Turn LinkedIn ads from an accepted line item expense into a scalable revenue channel that fits into your go-to-market strategy. Book a free consultation at FounderVideo.io.
You mentioned Salesforce. I'm a fan of Salesforce. We're actually transitioning our own stuff to Salesforce. And then I'll later ask you about the tech stack, because I'm curious to, with such a pool of tools these days, what is actually moving the needle and what do you use on your day-to-day at VEN? But let's back. CRM hygiene, how to get it. It's hard, especially with sales teams, I think, right? Like getting your team to comply with it and to be thorough about it and to, at the end of the day, a CRM is what you make it, right? Like the tool itself doesn't do nothing. It doesn't do anything, right? So, have you struggled with this yourself at the beginning, like with complying with it? And how do you overcome it? And how do you see teams getting around it?
Yeah, I've absolutely struggled with it. It's hard. It's a really, really hard thing to achieve. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that gets made in the RevOps world is sort of a hubris around believing that we know best. So we're going to design this and you are going to comply to it. And that attitude is, I think, and I've had that attitude. And I think what it does is it creates a very obvious misalignment. And so I think that the real way to access a team that is using it and get oriented with them in a way where you can create hygiene is you need to work really well with them and have really good relationships with them. Then you can start to understand where you need flexibility, where you, as RevOps, need to hack through something, or where you need support in terms of people or support in terms of tools in order to achieve it, and where you can ask for that to be done. There's a very kind of old philosophical conversation around CRMs on validation and locking down things. And my architect that I've worked with for ages now talks about how when we first do a CRM implementation, we don't create a lot of validation rules and lock things down. And by that, I mean, in order to leave this stage, I'm going to block you from doing it if you don't fill in these 4 or 5 fields, right? That's something that you eventually need. But I think a poor implementation will do that right off the gate. And all of a sudden, salespeople will go in and they'll not understand, and they haven't been enabled properly, and they can't move things around stages. And they don't know what they're doing, and the system keeps saying no, 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 no. Then you've started to lose them right away. And that's what I think an immature team does. Whereas a more mature team will go, okay, they're not going to do this right. Okay, we're not going to get all the data and all these fields the way we want them, like we want it, but we're going to let them have a little bit of an easier time, kind of run with the training wheels, and then we're going to teach them and guide them, but even more importantly, show them the types of insights they could be getting and show them the way it would be really useful to them if they are following the process that we've defined. And not only will they want to do it because they'll get insights, but they'll also understand it a lot better because they'll see that you're actually building it for their priorities. So when you do it that way, I think that you get more adoption, you get people buying in on you. It requires a little bit of patience because you don't get the level of governance that you want. And I think that RevOps people want that governance. But too much governance, you get rejection, you don't get adoption, and you're in a way worse place than if you eased into it and accept some of the realities that hygiene's not going to be perfect right out of the gate.
Yeah, right out of the gate, you don't want to have full adoption either necessarily, because getting a little bit more adoption every step forward is way easier than winning it back when you lost it, right? So that's right. Really good point. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to be reductive, but a lot of the management things or problems with teams and whatnot, it always, more often than not, comes down to put yourself in their shoes, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
so if they're not complying with this, why would it be? Why are they not seeing the value? They don't see the same thing that I'm seeing. Got to make them see that, right? Yeah, that's a good point. So tech stack wise, of course, CRM is the basis of all of it. But these days, with so much AI and Clay and connecting tools and workflows and removing people and whatnot, there's a lot of options. So much so that many companies, I think, are finding themselves in a this position. Like, I can use every tool, and I'm having a cost of tech and tools that's through the roof, and even then I'm not able to get anything done, right? So
Yeah.
what's your take on this? What do you think are essentials, things that any RevOps professional couldn't work without, and what do you work with on your day-to-day?
Yeah, for sure. Man, it's a problem. Tech stacks get overweight so fast, and I think it's just getting worse. There's a lot of evil out there with AI, and by evil I just mean a lot of, like, there's temptation to buy and add things to your stack that aren't actually doing anything, but they have really good promises, and in a lot of cases now are inexpensive, but the damage they can do is a lot, and just by creating distraction and extra things to click and look at when they're not really helping. Um, so the way I go about this is design the sales process really diligently and ignore the tools, right? Sit down with a flow chart and say, this is what I want to happen, and then this is what I want to happen, and then this is what I want to happen. And then you'll start to see, okay, well, this part's really hard. Is there a tool that can support it? Or this part's really manual. Is there a tool that can support it? Or this part requires a lot of information to be gathered. Is there a database that does it? Is there a database that can work with my system? And then all of a sudden, you'll start to see the little pieces that need to be there. I think the absolute worst place to start from, by contrast, is to say, well, Clay's cool, Smartly is cool, Instantly is cool, like, and just have a whole list of things. Oh, we could do this if we have this, and we could do this if we have this, and we could do this. So let's Frankenstein this gigantic system together, and now we can do anything we want. Well, what do we do? Right? What do we do? We haven't even thought that through yet. So that's what I would avoid. In terms of what I use, so I believe HubSpot and Salesforce each have their place in this world. I often advise clients when I'm asked this question. I usually think you either need Salesforce or you're going to one day. Salesforce has built a big, hard to use, ugly tool, but that can do anything. That's its value proposition. It can do anything. Infinitely configurable. There's an army of people out there that know how to configure that for you. It's going to cost you a lot of money. You're going to be stuck in a contract you hate. It's the sales process on the Salesforce side is going to frustrate you, but you will be able to do anything so long as you invest in it. If you have a simple sales process and you're an early stage, HubSpot you can get going in a day. Like, it's so simple, it's so easy. Non-technical users can understand it right away. I think it almost to its detriment, because people who really don't know what they're doing go and start building things, and then eventually it becomes a mess. So it needs to be managed in its own way, and it needs to be diligently implemented if you don't want to get to that place. But I think they both have their place, and my company is early, so I use HubSpot right now. I have a Salesforce instance that I play with, but I use HubSpot to run my business right now. And then I'm a fan of Clay. Like, I have to say it. Like, it allows me to pull from multiple databases. It always validates my emails for me. It does interesting things, like I can query blog posts of my competitors to see what they're doing, and it'll put it into a list for me that I can view. I can pull very specific pieces of information and place them into a table. I have some like slight LinkedIn automation that I use just to track some of the conversations because I get a lot of pings on there. I can zap that into Clay, and Clay can integrate into HubSpot. Like, I think it's a really useful tool that covers a lot of use cases. And I think it can actually simplify a lot of tech stacks for people because they might actually use all of these little pieces that Clay has really elegantly basically synthesized into a single tool. I don't know what other tools I think I love enough to talk about here, but those are the big ones. And of course, LinkedIn. I think it in almost every way is a terrific tool, other than the noisiness of it. But
right.
So be it.
To create content, outreach, touch points, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. And finding people and the way it very naturally opens conversations. You have the information there. The way it allows you to network, the way it allows you to get your message out. Because I think a lot of top of funnel these days is around content. I think it's the best way to generate top of funnel if you are the type of person that can do it. And you're doing it right now. That's what we're doing, isn't it?
Totally. Totally. You said before, for non-technical users, would you consider yourself technical? Because as far as I'm concerned, I mean, you're not an engineer or anything like that, right? And if so, because I don't consider myself technical either, but I love this stuff. I love, when I build workflows, the little stuff that I've got to build, because obviously is not that big of a deal. But when I get to set up tracking stuff or workflows and that kind of stuff, it feels really good, but it's hard, of course. And Salesforce, for example, now I'm trying to learn it, of course, because we want to pivot to it. And Clay as well. I want to get deeper and deeper to kind of like master it, because I think it's going to be a key tool in every tech stack in the next years, if it's not already. Mm-hmm. In your experience, not being technical, not being a programmer or a developer or an engineer or anything like that, how do you learn these things, and how do you set your mind up to think in a more structured architect type of way? Because if you want to excel at RevOps, in my opinion, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, you gotta have that kind of mind, right? In a way, at least.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think for myself, I'm right up to that line of am I technical? And I think by philosophy alone, I might just not be. I think of myself a lot in terms of my range and the different things that I can do. And I think that's the value that I bring to companies when I work with them. But I'm not good at building flows, for example. I can write the most rudimentary Apex, but I need ChatGPT to help me. So I haven't learned the language. I would never sell myself on my ability to code, even if I've built some formulas or like formula fields with Apex in them, but I'm not technical. But you do need to be able to think, like, you need to be able to speak the language, basically. I think you need to be able to talk technical. You need to be able to think in very structured ways. You need to be able to think in process. So I think it lends itself very naturally to people who are technically minded. And I think that people who are not technically minded at all, there's a place for them in RevOps, like on the enablement side, or focus specifically on kind of articulating user problems. But if you can't think in steps and stages and processes and stuff, you're probably going to have a hard time growing in the role.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So how did you transition into that? Because in sales, you don't necessarily need that technically minded. How did you level up in a way, right? How was that process to you? Like, did you take any, I don't know, not courses necessarily. I mean, maybe, of course, trial and error is the best teacher, but yeah, just tell me about that.
I never took a course. No. I have no certifications. I don't hire for certifications. I'll tell you this. I'll get a little bit into my background here. So I have a bachelor's degree in English literature. I have a master's degree in film. So that doesn't fit, right, at all. And I think if I go way back, I think I had a bad math teacher in grade 9 or 10. Sorry, I'm Canadian, ninth grade, 10th grade. And I think that I told myself at that time, I'm not good with numbers. I'm not good with math or sciences. I'm an arts person. And I went through school and I did it and I did well. And I got into sales only because I was looking for a job in media. And I found the very first sales job I did, I was working for a company that built a big piece of technology that sliced and diced big footage archives. But I sold stock footage. I sold outtakes from BBC to advertisers, right? Like if you watch a Coors Light ad and you see a sweeping shot of a wheat field in Colorado, someone like me sold that image to an advertising agency. That's why I got into sales, and that's how I got into tech. But in my early 30s, I got into a very aggressive environment when I joined Clearco, and the responsibilities that were expected of me were way beyond what I'd ever done. And the people around me had this kind of fuck it, I'll get it done attitude. And people were throwing spreadsheets at me when I had no idea how to use a spreadsheet. And the depth of knowledge that was required for me to run that RevOps department when I was mostly my knowledge of the technical stuff was extremely shallow at the time, just forced me to have to learn these things. And I think what I realized, because I was successful at it, was, wait, I am good at this stuff. I'm naturally oriented to thinking in month over month spreadsheet numbers. I think I'm naturally oriented into thinking in stages and progressions. And I think I'm naturally oriented around understanding data tables and numbers. And this was just stuff that I thought I was bad at. So I think there's some elements of does it fit with your the way you think and the way you learn, but I don't know. I can't say for sure. I can just talk about my experience.
That's really interesting, man. That's it forces you. Yeah, it's the best way to learn, right? But that's I'm sure a lot of people will resonate with it, because you're not the only one that didn't think.
I feel like there's a piece I need to say on this that is really important, because it's a core opinion of mine about the flip side of that, especially for those hiring. Watch out for certifications. Certifications can be an indication that somebody knows something, but they also can be hugely misleading about a person's ability to be effective within your business. If you ever go look at a Salesforce certification course, my architect uses the term obtuse. Basically, everything he describes in Salesforce is obtuse. The people who've gotten certifications have learned things like what the character count in a text field versus a long text field versus a regular text field are. They've learned the number of flows that you can be running within a specific period of time. These are things that might come in handy someday. These are things that are potentially valuable to know, but they are not things that are going to help your business at all. And so when I'm advising people around hiring people in RevOps, I think the number one, I wrote a post about it the other day, the number one thing I think in order for them to be successful is stakeholder management. Can they empathize and understand the problems of the user? And number two thing is business acumen. Technical skills will come. If you have empathy for your user and you have business acumen, you will figure out the technical piece. If you have a ton of technical expertise, but you don't have the other pieces, you're in trouble.
Facts. I like that take. Because it puts me in a better position. I'm not that technical, but I think I have the other two. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. I think you're right. I think Also, if you want the technical proof, it's what's better than a YouTube video walking through the process that you've built instead of having a certification, right? Like just prove yourself. If
Exactly,
you're
and
the
then
one
fire
trying
the
to get
code
hired.
into ChatGPT or whatever, and it'll tell you the answer, right?
Exactly.
That's way better.
Okay, I have some more. Oh yeah, let's talk about. This was an interesting question. I think I know what your answer is going to be after everything that we've talked about already. But I had a lot of curiosity about this question because there's been a lot of talk about how to do business development in 2024 and how sales teams. Well, there's this idea now that most of these sales reps need to level up and convert themselves into this sort of madman Pete, right? That is able to go on field trips and talk to clients, especially most importantly have industry expertise and know enough to resonate with the client, not just be a 25-year-old dialing on phone, whatever, like auto dial, whatever, or doing AI automated outreach or anything like that. So no, that brings up a question that is pretty relevant to this conversation, I think, which is the structure in which sales teams operate. To me, it seems like the predictable revenue from our Ross and that is slowly dying now, that everyone is shitting on to move towards a more efficient GTM. It's too structured in a way, right? It's just like it's almost a copy of a manufacturing process. It's treated as such, right? And I think if we want to move towards a more efficient and a more comprehensive way of doing sales, we're gonna need to get rid of some of that structure. Do you think that's the case? And if so, how to do it in a way that doesn't become too destructurized, right? To the point where nobody knows what they're doing, or because we don't want to go to that, right? So, where do you think the balance is there?
I think it's a great question, and I think that I think the reason why we're seeing so much of this and this being a problem is twofold, but it has a lot to do with 2020 and 2021. So I think two things happened in 2020 and 2021. Money got really cheap, and when money got really cheap, selling things was a lot easier because people would buy things, and people would buy things on a whim. People would buy things because they had budget. When I was at Clearco, I was on the small task force that raised $100 million. And I got to hire some of the most amazing people around me. And we weren't particularly judicious with budget. People on my team were making, that were answering to me, were making more money than I was. So they were coming with McKinsey backgrounds and stuff. And it was great. But I think that there was an environment where there was a lot, selling was easy. And also because that was happening, I think a lot of people were getting promoted. And so a lot of people gathered sort of seniority without maybe necessarily earning it. And I think one of the most rudimentary things you do in a sales org is structure the team, right? The BDRs make the calls, right? And then they book the demo, and then the demos worked by AE. And I'm a VP of sales, so I can do that. But you were a VP of sales because you got promoted in 2021 and you know this part, but did you gather all of the other information from your leaders at the time about getting through to your customer and speaking to them in the way that they want to be spoken to and speaking their language and all of the harder things? And so now money got hard, budgets got constrained, but we still see this one size fits all kind of sales process. So my advice to folks is build the process that works. And I think that it's going to be different for a lot of different companies. I know of a particular leader who's running a process that looks like this, but that's working extremely well. It's working extremely well for him, but he's selling into restaurants. And that is a group of people that don't get their phone hammered every day, that don't get their inbox spammed every day. It's not working in B2B tech sales. These people are getting hammered constantly. My inbox is constantly filled with things, and I just run a small consulting firm, but it's constantly filled with things and people trying to sell me stuff in a really clumsy and ineffective way. So if it's not working, then don't do it. You've got to do something else. But there are a whole bunch of new avenues that I think are really opening up. And then there's some old avenues that I think are working better than ever. Content is doing really well. Content's having a bit of a renaissance. Not just LinkedIn shouting. Like, I think there's tools, white papers, all of that stuff. Like, people are educating themselves on purchases. Pardon me, something in the background there. People are educating themselves on purchases more than ever, and this has been happening for 10 years. But like a lot of the sales cycle happens before someone talks sales. If you have a really effective means of doing that, then all of a sudden you can ease the burden on your sales team, have fewer people, have really qualified leads coming in. Thought leadership on LinkedIn is really working. Most of my revenue is booked out of professional organizations that I'm a part of. So I'm part of 3, Pavilion, Operators Guild, and Hampton. And I do really well out of those. But that's just me showing up, being helpful, being attentive, and those conversations turn into deeper conversations and they blossom into an engagement. Like, these are the things people need to be thinking through now when they're structuring their sales org, not just, hey, let's run an A, B, C, D, E test on my 19 touch point sequence and take the best converting touch from each of those sequences to make a super sequence, and then revenue solved. We're going to the moon. It's not going to work.
Good stuff. I love you shouting. I mean, everyone in the podcast, it seems like I'm bringing them to shout out thought leadership on LinkedIn that is working, whatever, because that's what we do. But it's just, it is what it is. It's what's working, right? On that note, I agree with you. Pavilion has brought us some really good deals as well. Didn't know of Operator Guilds, and Hampton I'm aware of, but I think it's kind of pricey. So didn't get into that.
Yeah, it is. And I haven't done a lot of business there, but I've found it to be a wonderful place, actually. Like, I've met some really great people there already. It's a good group.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, we can talk about it later too in private. I would like to get more feedback on it. But let's talk about what the most common problems you see from customers that you work with in regards to CRM implementation. What do you see when you get in their Salesforce, HubSpot, and other tools? Like, what's wrong most of the times? How do you fix it? Then we can get into more of the nitty gritty, like key configurations, settings, and or workflows that you set up to ensure that there's good visibility and tracking across the board.
Yeah, you know what? I think the best way to answer this is to quote my massage therapist, which was, she said to me, don't chase pain. Like, that we're taught not to chase pain. Like, I'll say, no, it hurts. Like, massage this hurts. And it's like, that's actually not the answer. There's a whole back, probably your legs, I don't know, maybe even your skull, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden it starts to feel better. And the reason I bring up this analogy is that the problems that people bring to me are so often not the problem that I end up trying to solve for them, and not always successfully. Sometimes it's just fix the workflow. But what I think I'm actually seeing is there's a whole variety of ways in which companies do not have product market fit. And I think that it's an elusive concept, and I'm going to be talking more about this, and you're going to see some more from me on this particular topic, because it's become so common in what I see that I feel compelled to try and fix it. But going back to the money is free problem, you had a whole bunch of companies that raised a bunch of money that were kind of generating revenue, that were going the right direction. Then all of a sudden they weren't. Either no one wanted to buy it anymore when budgets got constrained, so it was a nice to have, and therefore there's no product market fit, or they weren't able to fulfill their promise and they hit all kinds of churn problems and they didn't have product market fit. Or there's companies that make a really bad decision of bringing in a VP of sales or building a sales team too early, thinking that they're going to figure out product market fit, and they don't. And then there's the problem of founders having success generating revenue and running sales. And then all of a sudden, no one else can replicate that. And that happens a lot. Founders have VCs often. VCs call their friends make sweetheart deals. Founder gets excited, thinks that they have something. Then all of a sudden, when someone's actually cold calling, no one's interested. There's so many ways. Oh, and also like competitors. Like, oh yeah, you did have product market fit, but your competitor Clay came in and just wiped the floor with you. Had a better model. Everyone's leaving. They're going to go to Clay. So I get into these engagements where people are like, my BDR team sucks. It's the messaging. Can you help with the messaging? Or it's our tech stack, or it's our configuration, or whatever it is. And the answer is no. Like that's where you're seeing some of the impact. And that's where somebody in your organization has made an articulate plea as to what the problem is. And if it's fixed, it'll all be better. But when you zoom back, the fundamentals of the business are suffering. And I think the reason why is because people don't want to buy it or continue to use your product. And that's a really hard thing for people to swallow.
Definitely. Yeah, I saw some of your posts and I highly agree. I mean, a lot of people could feel like they had fake PMF back in 2020, 2021. Mm-hmm. They felt what it was, but now they don't have it anymore because PMF is not something that you own and like then, I have PMF forever now. It's a constant battle, right? So, and the way, how fast the market is moving these days, you could not have PMF 6 months from now if you fall behind, right? So, but okay, that's a really good point. But I want to get into the nitty gritty. Tell me about like stuff that you think that you see often too, that in terms of stages. Most importantly, I think, I talked to Chris Walker about this. What is the structure that companies should think of when building a proper pipeline architecture that gives full GTM, unified view, whatever, right? And he mentioned the bow tie framework from Winning by Design. I recently got the revenue architect, went through the revenue architecture stuff, and I think it's a really good model. Do you try to replicate that inside CRMs? Do you see that companies have a different type of framework or model already built out in their CRMs? And if so, how do you identify that?
Yeah, it's so funny. The bow tie model, it's a terrific model, but it's also the model that I've been building for 10 years. Like it's not, I think
it's a model. At the end of the day,
it's a model, and it's a model that's been around forever. I think that not to slight the work that they're doing. It's revenue by design, right? Or
Winning by Design, yeah.
Winning by Design, yeah. Not to slight the work that they're doing, because I think a lot of the times just getting people oriented and clear around a concept is the hard part. And I think they're doing that. And they're doing a really good job of it. But that's a simple model, but it's a good one. It's a good one, right? Like you have your funnel, you have your volume metrics, you have your conversion metrics, and you have your speed metrics, basically, is the sense of it. So I haven't read revenue architecture, but I'm familiar enough with it that I might speak about it slightly differently in terms of vernacular. And then you measure all the way through the customer lifecycle and retention, right? That's more or less, I think, the foundation of a B2B SaaS sales model. In terms of the nitty gritty, you need to decide where in your CRM these stages are going to live. And so there's lots, like this is different between HubSpot and Salesforce. And when you're in Salesforce, there is a lot of nuance around what the role of the lead is and what the role of the contact is. In both HubSpot and Salesforce, there's a lot of consideration about what function the contact plays, what function the company plays, and what function the deal plays or the opportunity. All of these things have to be really, really well designed, and that gets hard. In today's world, ABM is having a bit of a renaissance, and ABM can mean a lot of different things, but what it effectively means is I've got a list of accounts I'm going after, right? And if you've got a list of accounts you're going after, you're not necessarily like all of the inflow and people signing up and people clicking on paid ads and all of the noise that comes with that becomes less important, and you can all of a sudden simplify your architecture around just here's the 700 contacts that I think are going to be important to me. Let's watch them really closely. And if that's the way you're running your go-to-market, then how the contacts are configured and the stages and the statuses and the dispositions of the contact are really, really critical. Whereas if you have a B2B SaaS platform where anybody in go-to-market, junior through senior, could potentially use it or buy it, and it's a usage-based model, and I'm going to run a lot of paid ads, this very same bow tie model could use a lot of like infrastructure early on in the lead. And then there could be really kind of simple opportunity stages that align with the bow tie model, right? So there's a lot to consider no matter what you're doing, but I think that there is a lot of thinking that goes into applying how your business is going to work within this model and how to reflect that the right way in your CRM.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's really good insight right there. It really depends. There's a bunch of factors at play. And I would argue that even if you think what you're doing, it's the thing that makes the most sense. Maybe then something happens. Maybe you put it at, you stress tested and turns out the way you set up this contact doesn't work anymore, because when this happens, then this gets corrupted or this doesn't get updated, or it's tough.
Yeah.
Work in progress always, right?
It is. It's a funny thing with being an admin, which is, I remember I used to get sent edge cases from salespeople a lot, and I'd always just look at them and go, "Oh, well, that's an edge case. Like, here, I'll manually fix that. You're good. You're good to go." And as I've sort of gotten older and hopefully, let's hope, a little more mature, I've started to realize that all of those should be taken super seriously. Like, an edge case is an opportunity for you to go in and fundamentally improve your infrastructure. And it also could be a sign that you've built something that isn't complete, right? And that you should go and actually reconsider this situation and think through whether or not there are situations like it that need to be accommodated, and then build it and roll it out and educate and continue to get better. But I think there's a lot of temptation to be like, "Oh, you just did it wrong," or, that person just has a funny title, or, their procurement process is weird. So whatever, we'll just treat this as its own kind of piece over here that's not part of the picture. It should be part of the picture.
Totally. Why do you think most revenue forecasts are wrong, and how to build an operating model that is actually at least a little bit more accurate? Because of course, nobody can predict the future. Right?
Yeah. Why are they always wrong? There's so many reasons, but the number one reason is optimism, I think, or some version of delusion. And so I think that the top line number, so you don't even get into the mechanics of it. The top line number is something that either should feel right or it doesn't feel right. And if you have the pressure of a board breathing down your neck, the bigger number is going to feel more right to you, but everybody else in the room probably knows that number is wrong. And I think you need to build an organization where those people can tell that to you and you can work with it. But that's a high level thing. I think there are some really tactical mistakes that get made screwing up models. And one of these things I like to talk about, because I do this demonstration for companies and it's usually one of those wow moments, is I'll crack open somebody's operating model and I will isolate usually like 8 to 10 really key assumptions in it, which is, we're going to hit this many leads and they're going to get to the second stage at this conversion rate, and then they're going to take demos at this conversion rate or whatever. And then our churn is going to be 2% each month. When you take all of those and you stack them on top of each other, I'll take them and I'll turn them all to just 90%. So I'll say, okay, here are like 8 core assumptions that you have in your model. Let's say you get 90% on each of them. And people think that when I do that, that they're going to end up at 90% of the revenue that they projected. But that's actually not how numbers work. And it creates a very devastating scenario. And so you do that. And the last one I remember doing, the final revenue number for the year was 50%. So if they do a 90% job on everything that they thought they were going to do, they're going to end up at 50% of their target. And then that's a wake up moment to be like, okay, we've built a model where we have to do everything perfectly, basically. Like, none of these things can fail. And it will. You're not going to get an A+ on all 10 courses you're taking at once, right? Maybe you can, but it's not likely. So then you got to go back and you've got to really think this through and rebuild the model. And you've got to be really careful about the assumptions you've pulled and the state of the business when you got those assumptions, and if they're realistic, and how much you're projecting them to grow, and how much of your TAM you're getting into, and if it's getting harder, and if there are competitors coming, because you're going to devastate that final number if you don't do it right.
Totally. Got to be way more conservative. That's about it, in a way, right? Like,
conservative is realistic, because I think that people can be optimistic, right? And that is a place where it'll get you really bad.
I like that quote. Conservative is realistic. When you think you're being conservative, you're actually getting closer to reality than you think.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah, totally. And then if you get a surprise, let it be good at least, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Totally.
Give yourself that room. Give yourself that chance.
Totally. No, totally. I mean, we do that with our own financial models, and it feels great. It feels great to get those surprises. Why is it important? I think you mentioned this in a post talking about contracted versus uncontracted revenue, recurring revenue. Sorry. And so I wanted to ask you, which one do you see to be more common in SaaS, or at least among your clients? Because I know you work with fintech mostly. And then which is better, in your opinion, for valuations and overall business health? And to that, which one of each will see more in this new era of SaaS, of profitable, efficient growth?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I don't know of anyone else who's on this train, by the way. So maybe this isn't original. But I was just thinking through like recurring revenue. I was thinking about it through my own business, because I don't right now actually have a recurring revenue model. In fact, one of my main value propositions is like, I tell my clients, I'm trying to work myself out of the engagement. Like, I want to deliver you something that you can take and make your business better, and I'll be gone. And then you'll call me back, or you'll tell your friends, and that's how it'll work. But the valuations on businesses with recurring revenue are many multiples of the valuations on businesses without. We know that. We've known that for a very long time. And the way SaaS traditionally has gone in terms of generating recurring revenue is to lock people into contracts. That's really easy to model. That is recurring revenue. It's fine. Now, what has happened over the last couple of years is there's been a lot of churn, and a lot of people are finding some of the tools and the contracts that they are in. These tools are not useful. And it's had me questioning whether or not the recurring revenue that you claim based on the contracts that you have people locked into is an indication of your business health. It might not be, because I think about a lot of companies right now are struggling with their Salesforce contracts, right? And they're not saying nice things about Salesforce. It's probably because they haven't built it properly. This is no slight on Salesforce, but they're not saying nice things about Salesforce. They're not happy with their contracts. And when they have the opportunity to leave that contract, they will, right? And Salesforce is going to be fine because it's a giant company with a lot of smart people and a lot of resolve. But a earlier stage SaaS company with this problem might just see their their churn on a given month just go bananas. and then they'll be in a lot of trouble. Whereas there's a new trend of usage-based models. And I think usage-based models are really appealing to the customer because you are only paying for what you need. And that fits very nicely with the mentality of profitable, efficient growth, right? But people who come back and pay for something month after month after month that they don't have to me, that tells you something really valuable about the health of a business. However, I have no idea if investors are valuing that differently. I think they should, but I'm not seeing anywhere where anyone's talking about this, and I'm really curious.
They totally should, because it's not the same thing to pay for the same amount of credits or even more for Clay every month to month to month to month than paying the same subscription over and over, whether you use it or not.
It's so funny. I've been thinking about Clay a lot, and I've been reading a lot about that acquisition. But they do they have a usage-based model. So, and they just got that crazy valuation. So maybe it is working. Maybe it is something that more than just me is thinking about.
Yeah, I think what, to your point, is that usage-based models are really good and demonstrate more business health, in my opinion, when you still have recurring revenue. But it's also way harder to get. Like, your product needs to be really good. Like, otherwise, of course, people are not coming back. Yeah. Clay, in partly it's because of the great product they have, and also I think it's one of the few companies that has such a great product, but at the same time they're focused and they're laser focused on getting the go-to-market right. They have this creator program that is super good. They're spending money on thought leader ads of the creators, right? Yeah. They're evangelizing. They're creating content. It's all over LinkedIn, right? Everyone talks about Clay. So I think the combination of those two is what makes SaaS successful, right? At the end of the day. So yeah, it's a really great example. It's an interesting concept, right? And I think, to your point, usage based, it's up and coming because of, well, it's working more because people prefer it more, and also that tells a lot about how we're moving away from contracted revenue in a way, at least for the long run. Nobody wants to sign a 3-year contract for a tool that they don't know if they're gonna keep using or that they're gonna get adoption in the team. Like, it's nobody. So especially when it's multiple 5 figures expense a year or more, right?
LinkedIn still does it with the recruiting software, and they can, because they don't have a competitor. You ever tried to Google LinkedIn competitors? It's just like, it's crickets. That's a terrible way to treat your customer. It's like, oh, I got you. It's like the amusement park kind of mentality. It's like, oh yeah, well, you're gonna die of dehydration, or you're gonna pay $9 for this bottle of water? I bet you'll pay $9. Yeah. Right. Thanks. Yeah.
I think that's what makes monopolies last way shorter. It opens up the opportunity for a newcomer to come and like take profit off of the anger that the monopolist is building up to. So it's only a matter of time until we get there are already, I think, people are trying to build marketplaces for recruiting, and there's other options too, other than LinkedIn, in my opinion. But hey, LinkedIn will always be there, and of course, for now, they're big enough to do that. So whatever. Salesforce is too, until we get a better option too, but that will take some time.
Yeah, I mean, Salesforce, I think they need to watch it. I think they need. HubSpot is doing so well with these early stage companies, and I think there's going to be a lot more of them, and companies are going to be a lot smaller. Salesforce will always own the enterprise. I don't know anyone who's going to touch that, but I think they could be doing more to help with the early stage stuff or competing there.
As a Salesforce user, would you say it's wrong completely for an earlier stage startup to do Salesforce?
No, I wouldn't say it's wrong. I would say it's expensive and it will require more attention. I think that if you have a complex business, it's the right decision, even right out of the gate. But a lot of businesses start simple, right? With one ICP, one motion, one product. And if that's the case, Salesforce might be overkill. But if you have designs on going a little more complex or a little more multifaceted, there will become a time when HubSpot may break down on you unless you're really diligent. So there's an argument that you should just start with Salesforce. It's a tough question.
It is, yeah. No, but that's a good insight. That helps. Okay. Most common objections. I forgot to ask this to latest guest, and I think it's a question I'm going to start asking to every new guest because I think it's really interesting, especially entrepreneurs and business owners. What common objections do you run into with VEN, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the thing I see the most is that people would rather have someone full time, and I think that that's an objection that I support in a lot of ways. I think that's why it's hard to overcome it. But what I do to overcome that is I now have a specific named designed package called interim head of RevOps package, where I work with people to get their stuff in order and get them to a place where they know exactly who they need to hire. They know what the scope of that role is going to be, and then I'll even help them go find it, since I have a big network of RevOps people. But that's one main objection, and then the other one is mainly around not feeling like investing in it. And I think that objection is sometimes really hard because it's an indication of a mentality anchored to a decision that's already been made. But I mean, it's not hard for me to sketch out a scenario where someone really is regretting the decision not to invest in their stack or in their workflows. So usually what I'll do is I'll just apply my knowledge and freestyle a scenario for somebody on like, okay, you don't have to invest, but here's what I think will happen in the next year for you if you don't fix this.
Do some prospects think that what you do, it's IT in a way? Or most, I mean, I guess if you work with B2B SaaS and fintech, you don't have that problem as much, but with other businesses, we've seen that. So
yeah, I think occasionally I'll come across somebody, usually somebody who doesn't even fit at the company they're at. Like, sometimes I work for a couple companies that have gone and gotten like people that have never been in tech before because they're really connected or they're subject matter experts in certain areas. And they think of it as IT for sure. There's an IT component to it, I suppose, but I think of RevOps as something that breaks apart a little bit as you get into enterprise. As an organization, like I think that IT piece can break off at a certain point. It doesn't have to, but I think it can. And that your centralized systems are now like run out of their own department that maybe runs up into a CTO. There was a time when I objected to that really hard. In fact, there's a very old LinkedIn thread where I kind of got into it with somebody about this, but now maybe I should go back to it and tell him maybe I agree a little bit more than I did. But yeah, I think that sometimes, you know what, the spirit of that objection lives, like where somebody's like, why would we bring you in at that cost to just configure our system a little bit better? I'm like, well, I'm not going to configure your system. I'm going to try and completely redirect your entire customer acquisition and retention motion. And then they'll see if there's an appetite for that scope. Right. Sometimes there is, totally. Sometimes there isn't. Yeah.
It sounds like really, really large scope too. I'm assuming, I don't know how big you guys are either, but I'm wondering, how do you handle the complexity of it all with every client? How do you ensure, I mean, I'm sure you have it systemized at this point, but like, yeah, I'm curious to know how does that work internally to manage multiple clients at once and at the same time, paying enough care and attention to every process, because it's not an easy task. It's not something that you can repeat on, like, build an SOP, right? You cannot do that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good because it's a good question, because I wouldn't say we're systematized, because there's so much nuance to every customer we go into. So I have I have sort of sections of things broken out. Like if I need to take somebody through the exercise of redefining their stages, I have specific materials I use and templates and things for them to fill out. But I don't go in and do like step 1 is this, then step 2 is that. Like that's custom each time. And sometimes it's hard. So there's 5 of us. And I also have a roster of folks who have kind of worked with me in the past that who come in, that have full-time jobs, and they'll come in and help on specific things. And I hope one day I can roll them all into the company. But resourcing is a challenge sometimes. So I have like a full-time Salesforce architect because there's so much work around that. But we just try and do our best to schedule things. And what I actually am trying to do with the business is break it, right? Like I'm trying to fill up our schedule so much that it's overflowing so that I can justify bringing in other people, because I'm early and I'm bootstrapped, right? And so cash flow is really important, and I can't waste money on hiring people that I don't have full utilization for. But I've been so lucky that some of the people in my network have been excited enough to come work with me that I basically get them to the point where I'm paying them as full-time contractors and then transition them into a full-time headcount.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. To wrap up, I want to know more about your vision with VEN too, and like where you want to take it, and I guess where you guys at right now. If you want to drop numbers too, I'll be curious. But like just in general, what is the vision with it, and is there a product component to it in that vision? Because I think, just in general, most of the tech stack that we work with right now, I think will dry out in a way a few years from now, and we're going to need better versions of it, new integrations, or just new tech in a way, right? For some of these stuff. So maybe you're looking to build some of that in-house, or I don't know,
So you've tapped on what I think a lot of companies that are successful doing this do, which is they start seeing a problem so often that they realize there's a solution and they set out to build that solution. So you hope for something like that, but so far my experience has been, I think what people need is some expertise. Like they need someone to come in and help them. And I think you pointed out earlier that RevOps hasn't been around that long. And what that has actually done is there is a very, very low talent density at the VP executive level with RevOps. There just aren't very many of us. And so the main value proposition that's been working is like my company is kind of undifferentiated. We service a segment that is fairly well serviced and where there's a ton of competition. But what differentiates us is that I personally have sat on executive teams at unicorns doing this function. And so that is actually what wins me deals. And that's not necessarily scalable. So in terms of the vision, I'm actually struggling with that question right now. I think that I have an opportunity to become highly certified on the fintech side and become the go-to like fintech RevOps shop. But 40% of my customers are B2B SaaS. And so I'm like, do I want to actually do that? Or maybe I want to double down on SaaS. So I think that I have a lot of work to do on the vision, to be honest with you. I started this because something fell on my plate and it's just been busy. It's just been busy. I've been at it for not even a year and a half. We have almost 20 customers. We have almost $1 million in revenue. We'll cross that any minute now. And it's hard to think how should this be different or better right now, but it is something I need to think about. So I'll keep you posted.
Keep me, please. Yeah, I'm hoping to have another chat apart from this podcast because I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think there's a lot of insights. And I mean, hopefully, you can learn something from me too. But I think it will be the other way in the first place. But yeah, man, it's been a pleasure to have you. I think I mean, you should be proud because 1 million ARR, it's no peanuts to for an early stage company. So that's awesome. Yeah, it's been a really great conversation. I hope the audience finds it valuable because I think there are a lot of gold nuggets in here. And hopefully we can have you back maybe a year or two after this, or whatever, whenever the time is right. But yeah, we'll stay in touch. And do you want to shout out anything? Any new stuff coming up that you would like to talk about? Of course, go follow James McKay on LinkedIn. That's where you're the most active, right?
Yeah. Follow me on LinkedIn. It's my main channel. I think it's my only channel. I don't have any other media. I think there's nothing I want to shout out now, but I think I'll just tease that I'm going to be making a pretty significant announcement about an initiative I have coming up. I think I might have alluded to it a little earlier around product market fit. And so I might have a very specific thing I'm going to say about that. So I think just follow me and look out for that because I think it's going to be really, really interesting. So yeah, you'll see.
Nice. Yeah, we'll be in the lookout for it, man. And yeah, it's, as I said, it's been a pleasure. So yeah, we'll stay in touch and hope the audience enjoyed.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much, Will. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the FounderVideo podcast with Will Martin, and we'll see you on the next episode.